Okay, everybody, thank you and for being here on week 4. Really appreciate your participation so far. I've had an opportunity to look at all your homework. We're going to be talking about that. I really appreciate the participation. The homework was phenomenal. A lot of great stuff there, and we'll go over that here pretty soon. Just kind of opening it out. Did anybody have any major issues, questions between last week and this week, and with the homework and anything else? We didn't have anybody sign up for office hours again last week, so just wondering. All right, cool. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started with this week. We do have a guest speaker that's going to join us in about 40 minutes or so to talk about regulatory. MRC Global, fantastic organization. Shelby and I have been working with them for a number of years, and I think they're going to be, as usual, sharing some pretty quality information. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me share my presentation. All right, everyone should see. Someone give me a thumbs up if they see the Memphis Challenge 2021. Yet another PowerPoint mistake. All right, here we go. So tonight we're going to go over customer and solution, and we're going to go over your homework as well. We'll try to make that brief, keep that in within 5 or 6 minutes. Then we're going to talk about value propositions leading up into where we talk about regulatory, and we'll have our guest speaker join us at that point. We might have to stop short, and then we'll come back to it afterwards after they speak, but then we'll also cover intellectual property before the night's up. After tonight, you should have a very good understanding of the problem, the customer segmentation, and the solution. You might have to hone that and craft that a little bit, but putting those 3 bits of information together is going to allow you to kind of get to that 60-second elevator pitch that we've been talking about. Also, as you dig deeper and draw it out more, it'll become most of the content that's in your presentation deck as well. So this is pretty important stuff these last few weeks. It kind of sets everything up from this point out. All right, so as we discussed, that solution statement really needs to match up in many ways to the problem statement. So we talked about the who, what, when, why, and where, and then also about the how, right? So it's all the things, these problems are happening at this time for these people at this location, when this is occurring, and this is the pain that they're receiving from that, the big problem, the big hairy problem. And then a really small, like how they could find relief for that pain would be the prelude to the solution. Then you started talking about who the customer is, and that's really what this target audience is. So the solution statement needs to be pointed at the target audience, the main customer. And early on in startups, your goal there is to kind of focus on the beachhead customer. That's one we've talked about last week also, that first set of customers that are going to lead to the larger mass market potentially, but that first set of customers has to be achieved and acquired before you can kind of get there, right? And sometimes there's some pre-selling that has to go on, but here the message, the narrative is around the target audience. So it's about the who and what they're going to gain, the solution that you're providing, slightly a little bit differences between what you're providing and what the competition providing, or the items or whatever the products or solutions that are already in place, the ones you're trying to replace and enhance. And then also on top of that, the key benefits. What are they going to provide or find value in when they're talking about that? And again, kind of like how you set yourself up from and apart from the primary competitive alternatives that are in the market. So solution statements, like I said, kind of match up or need to match up to the problem to include the customer. And then when you have those 3 things, those 3 components all measured together and all matched together, that's when you have your overall kind of quick pitch around what you're trying to do, for what reason, and for whom. All right, so let's go switch over to another thing to share. Let's go over your homework real quick. All right. Okay, so we're going to start off with, team 1. All right, so somebody give me a thumbs up if they see the screen with the Google Docs. Awesome. All right, so team number 1, this is your homework assignment for the second week. Thank you for including a lot of the background in your research. I thought that was really good. I mean, I know everybody's done research, but I kind of like seeing, what you were basing your information on, what you're kind of basing your theories on. So this is really good. You did a good job starting to kind of define and document the types of customers, the typical customer segments. And I like most of y'all did the same thing, right? So you started to really understand what all the key players are that you need to attract and engage, right? And then eventually delight with your product. So drug manufacturers, doctors, insurance companies, all these players play a part. Now, one thing I will say is, like, the first thing to do is what you did. kind of throw all of them out on the wall and see which ones stick the most. From there, you need to dwindle it down to the list of customers that are the specific early entry areas, right? So the ones that you are going to go target the first, those are that beachhead, right? So it might not be the doctors, might not be the patient, it may be the insurance providers, because you have to go and convince them to include those in as a third-party payment system. It might be the doctors because you have to influence them, or it might be the patients because ultimately they're the ones who are going to influence the doctors as well. Excuse me. So, in here, I love the way that you've kind of put in the all up segmentations of customers. And then just know that when we start getting to the solution, kind of directing that towards maybe the early ones are the ones maybe even though find the most benefit, but aren't actually going to be paying you, but the one you're truly solving the problem for. Create a customer persona. So the drug manufacturers, companies with other drugs and gene payloads, that's good. I mean, I think that's kind of considering that multi-segmented kind of approach that we talked about last week. Drug manufacturers need to be able to effectively deliver medicine and or gene therapies. True. I mean, they're only as effective as the method that they're used for delivery in many cases. Some fears and issues on the patients. Love this. This is about looking deep and following the journey of where the problem really lies. The delivery method is unsafe, it's ineffective, so on and so forth. You have certain fears and issues around the manufacturing, hopes and personal goals the drug will cure them of the disease. I mean, these are all motivation for making a decision of why you might want to use a solution. And what I'm doing is I'm reading these things. I'm like picking apart the parts that actually jump out at me that are kind of the value propositions, right? So I can kind of see this. So if I'm seeing this through these words, imagine what it'll be like if you have it in kind of a concise paragraph formatted or speaking to it in less of a bulletized form, and just a kind of a nice steady narrative about what your problem, solution, and customer is. So good job. I think there's a lot of great stuff here. And then y'all do a good job of putting all this together, all that other information into actually a solution statement. Now, this solution statement I think is good, but I also think it's a bit, well, I mean, I don't want to say it's a bit technical because it's not overly technical. I know probably everybody in the audience is going, oh my God, there's no technology, technical talk in this. But the idea here is like some of this may kind of get in the way of the message, right? So as I was breaking this down, your opening statement is for transitional gene therapy companies who are dependent on safe and effective drug delivery method, non-toxic, less immunogenic, to deliver their therapeutic payloads, this naturally derived lipid nanoparticle with enhanced gene therapeutic loading and delivery efficacy addresses major limitations of current standards. I almost got every word 100% correct. Can't believe it. All right. So that first paragraph is really talking about how your solution alleviates the limitations of other current standards. I don't necessarily kind of have an issue with the statement as it is, but it doesn't set up necessarily the hook, which is more of the problem. Now, obviously, I wouldn't bring a lot of the problem statement into this, but more so, I would lead off with the ineffective ways that current things are being delivered, right? So I might change this a little bit up. So where my statement about my solution is more heroic, right? It's actually set up in the narrative, even in the small kind of microscopic way, that I'm still stating the pain first, but then I'm leading into the value that I'm delivering through my solution. I hope that makes sense to everyone that we're talking to on team one there. So I think a little bit of reshuffling and maybe putting a little less of some of the things about the LNPs and non-synthetic LNPs that are causing an issue. Like, so the current standard synthetic catatonic LNPs are foreign-induced an immune response and can be cytotoxic when administered chronically, right? You're talking about their problems when really you're not really caring about, I mean, most of the people listening to you aren't going to care about their specific problems out there. They're more going to care about the fact that these other two are not effective because in general, they have these problems, right? So I guess what I'm saying is like, you don't have to like draw out these two other formats in order to deliver your solution statement. It might even actually get a little bit in the way. I think you'll find that out when you start kind of crafting a script for your 60-second pitch. These areas right here in the middle, the LNP area and this non-synthetic, might actually trip up the overall narrative. I'm going to leave it to y'all to take what I've said and kind of what your thoughts are and kind of start working on that script after this week to kind of see if I'm right or if I'm wrong, right? So prove me right or prove me wrong. I think that's the best way of saying it. So I think you got a great first draft. I mean, a very extensive and impressive first draft. So I'm very pleased at what I'm seeing here. You can have everybody always has room for improvement in these regards, and especially as you move toward that 60-second elevator pitch script. All right, so let's open it up real quick for team one to ask any questions. Remember, you're on mute, so you need to come off.
Hi, this is Cody from Team One. So we are focusing, we kind of have three different targets right now. Like we were talking about like insurance companies, one, and then we have patients, doctors, two, and then we have drug manufacturing companies. If we were to focus on drug manufacturers, should we still keep some of that solution statement talking about the methods that aren't working? Because if we were targeting the drug manufacturers, they have a current method that's the standard of care, but we want to come up with a better method. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think telling people upstream about problems that could occur downstream from their product not being as effective as it possibly can is a very compelling way to talk to them, right? So you're coming with a novel approach that can provide for a better delivery mechanism than the current standards that they already are using, right? These are standards that they have to use because they're the only ones available. So your pitch here is, yeah, kind of stating all the way the downstream problems, but putting it closer in terms of where their value proposition is. I mean, they will get market share growth potentially by taking on your product delivery mechanism over the others because their efficacy numbers will go up, theoretically, right? So, I mean, even though I'm saying mention things that are the pain points downstream, you still have to focus on the value propositions of the specific customer that you're trying to target.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, so let's move on to team two, which did a great job. Put it in this PowerPoint presentation. I really appreciate that. Very easy to read. Okay, and you even included the discovery canvas in here and the part that we're talking about, which is customer. So chloroplast engineering to design plant that grows faster, efficiently, and stronger, right? So market, the agriculture and food industry, vendors, Bayer, leading in the seed business, supermarkets, right? The downstream sellers of the product, obviously farmers. And I like how you've kind of segmented these farmers, right? Because farmers itself is a market, but as you've graciously and generously illustrated here, there are segmentations inside of that market. There's the hobbyist, like I love that, the small. I mean, right now we're starting a lot of vertical farming going on, a lot of container-based farming, a lot of large warehouse-based farming inside of communities, inside of rural areas and urban areas. So it's kind of a brand new space in that regard. And each one of those could be a different type of farmer with different value propositions. In this case, I'll just go ahead and say some things. In this case, in order to kind of pick your beachhead, you might want to pick the beachhead that is smaller or medium size, or the beachhead customer that is probably more of an early adopter than some of the others. Some of those that are more regionally providing services or food, so a lot of farm to table type stuff. So those things are very local and have a timeline of needing to get fresh, good products to the restaurants and the stores and everything else in a very rapid fashion. So what I'm saying here is, like, I love how you segmented it. Now you need to go down a few levels of more granularity when you start picking out that target customer of saying, well, although we think all of these farmers will benefit from our product, and it's not a bad statement to say that. And I also believe that we can capture a fair market share from all of these segmentations. We have chosen to focus in this specific area because we believe they're going to be early adopters for this reason, right? So when you're starting to do this is all about peeling away the onion, right? So you got a lot of layers already peeled off here, but there's more granularity that you need to get down to kind of condition yourself for what that beachhead customer might be, that first initial customer. Because remember, you got to get that kind of right, because you're going to bank on that with other customers. You're going to use that implementation of your product to gain more feedback and insight about your product to make it better for the next group of individuals. You're going to actually be able to utilize what you're doing in that market as part of your marketing narrative for the next market, right? So you can say who you're working with, you can put logos on websites and those kind of things and really tout what you've already done. So picking that initial beachhead can be the make or break for you getting into, or at least efficiently and easily getting into another market or subsequent market after that. And usually subsequent markets are larger than the one you started off with. All right, so the persona and the agricultural market. I really enjoyed this. I mean, I wouldn't say this is like down to the persona level, right? But I think this is a good insight into the way y'all kind of broke this down from what I was just saying and some of the other things. And also, I'll let you know is like there's different levels of persona, right? I generally work with consumer grade products and different things that are going to be eventually used by like everyone on this call, right? So it's like the end user is the everyday person. That to me, I need to get down to the level of persona where I'm actually targeting a specific type of person, right? A specific demographic of person. Here, we're talking about markets, right? But going back to what I just said, the market doesn't make the decision about the product. The farmer makes the decision about the product in this regard, right? The healthcare provider might make the decision, or the patient might make the decision in some other examples that we've already talked about. So you still need to get down to that level of granularity that says this type of farmer that fits in this type, this level of demographic and geographic and everything else, that would be motivated by this to buy this at this point, right? So you have to really get down to that level. But here, I think this is great, right? You really broke it down by, which ones you feel are, have the good market share. Where are your total areas? And let's see what this is. Only brand loyalists might represent a challenge for the adoption of our solution. Right. That's true. And that's always true, right? If you have something that is, they're very, very, very loyal to an existing brand, then that can cause problems. And those people, those brand loyalists, I hope you remember a word that I used last week, but those are saboteurs, right? Farmers also farm in a collective, right? So if you're trying to penetrate a certain farmer, and they're part of a collective, and you have some people in that collective that are very brand loyal to something that's already traditional, your work is ahead of you of trying to convince them otherwise. My goal, my focus is to actually focus on the saboteur and find the value proposition for the saboteur and break down what is the perceived value for my competitive brand or my competitor's brand, right? So there's ways to still focus on those customers, even combat brand loyalists who may be saboteurs in a situation like a collective or something like that. Also, those might not be part of your beachhead. If you feel like there's a bunch of brand loyalty in that one area, focus in another area. Strength comes with numbers. That's all I got to say.
Brian,
Okay.
can I ask one question? Sorry,
Yeah,
I had some delay. I didn't hear what you said, just the previous slide about the vendors, just before this slide.
This one?
Yeah. For example, for vendor, are they for customers, or should we consider them as part of a supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. That's not one probably I can answer right now without more investigation. I'm going to say that, but then I'm going to say this. It's like sometimes those are partners, right? Sometimes those are the people, the channels that you need to help you get to the end state. So in order to do that, considering they're not buying from you, but they may represent you, or at least not getting your way, then you may have to do kind of a value proposition rundown with them as well, especially if you're doing business development and you think that they're a value added reseller or a value added partner that can actually help you penetrate some of these markets. So for example, if you had a competitive market to something, competitive product, like another chemical company, or Bayer has a lot of things across the board. Bayer might be a saboteur in itself, but also people loyal to that brand, right? So if you have a lot of people loyal to that brand, they have a semi-competitive product than yours, then one thing to do is say, hey, Bayer, I got a better product, right? And then let Bayer do all the selling for you, and you take a royalty share. I mean, a lot of what we talk about with tech transfer and commercialization, those are a lot of the scenarios that occur. A bigger company will buy the technology from the original inventors or from the institution. A revenue share situation occurs, plus cash on the table, so on and so forth, all sorts of things. And then a lion's share of the fabrication, not a lion's share, a complete share of the fabrication, sales, marketing, everything else now resides at that larger company that has acquired, or at least, licensed the technology for you, and y'all don't have to do anything other than go to your mailbox for money every month. And that's a great place to be, right? So that's where I'm my answer is a rather long one, but don't see a competitor that also could be seen as a partner.
Okay, thank you very much. Is what
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
looking.
All right. So this solution statement for farmers and governments who like to maintain and increase their crop yield in order to fight against growing food scarcity. The block seed, by the way, I did look at y'all's name list. There's some great names on there. The block seed is a solution that proposes to design plants that grow faster, efficiently, and stronger. Unlike GMO plants that target plants' DNA and create fear for customer, our product focus on chloroplast engineering. I think I might not have read that very well, but if I were to have read that perfectly, I'm still not sure that I'm really torn by this or really drawn into this, right? This hasn't had much effect on me, and I don't mean to sound insulting. I promise you, I'm really just being constructive here. It's like there needs to be more here, right? There needs to be more here that does draw a delineation between a differentiation between what the competitive products are and what your products are. And then a little bit more about the benefits of your product for whom, right? I'd expand a little bit more. You don't necessarily have to expand like into the incremental different types of farmers or governments, but it's almost like if there was some more information in here about like further downstream of what this food scarcity actually is like, how much damage is done, how much is lost, how much time more does it take because of the existing things, just some very small, maybe one or two things about what's going on in the current market that makes your product so much better. All right. So I think y'all have got a really, really, really solid, good first pass. Just like I said last week with the problem statement, my only challenge here for all three teams is to now take that a little bit further and actually start kind of building that script, putting the problem statement together with the solution statement, as well as the information about the customer, and start building that 60-second elevator pitch video script. Okay. All right. Any questions?
I have a question. So our market space is kind of all over, right? Because we also want to target high income individuals who are like hobbyists and who can grow nutritious fruit in their backyard,
Right.
and like have enough nutrition for the day in smaller portions. And then we're also looking at general population who would benefit our product through farmers, etc. Like so we don't know, like during the investors pitch, what is the investor looking at? Are they looking at the like how big the market is, or are they looking at like how much money are we going to make or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, yes, the quick answer is yes. Every investor is looking for ROI, right? Return on their investment. And they are expecting 5 to 10x on that. If they're very, very, if they've invested very, very well, that's an expectation they can have, right? But they're certainly looking for return on their investment, and they're not looking just for what they invested back, right? So their motivation is going to be, and their value proposition is like, you fit into a portfolio. I know the people in the network that could be meaningful for your product and your company, meaning I know a lot of people in the agriculture world or in the healthcare space or what have you, and I can help you with my money and my connections, right? So in order to get repayment for that, my motivation is you killing it, getting it out in the market, and really, capturing a large market share. Now, where it falls down is if they feel like your basic, your focus on what market share you think you can get is way too high, right? It's just a pipe dream. No one can get that, right? So when they see things like 50% market share by 18 months, right, or 8 months, they're going to be like, no, right? And so you have to be very realistic, but just know that, yeah, that's what they're looking at, is their return on investment. But don't think that they're also not motivated or moved by alleviating pain points in the market, right? So for efficient and effective delivery of medicines, that can save lives, or at least, well, let's just leave it there, save lives. That's motivational, right? That's a reason to actually say, well, I want my money and I want my money back and I want 4X for that. But I also like the idea of curing this problem, right? So it's all part and parcel. But yeah, just please know that their main motivation is very capitalistic. It's about money.
Right. Because like the demographic that we're looking at is like the developing countries,
Mhm.
and the farmers in the developing countries don't make money,
Right.
and selling the technology to just them would not make a lot of sense. So maybe like targeting grocery stores.
Yep. Or
something.
importers, or the ones, that who is bringing in all that product from those countries, those third, fourth, fifth, second, whatever countries are doing it, that yeah, the farmers aren't making anything really off their product. Unfortunately, I'm getting a little torn away with that, but my point being is like, if they're not able to afford your product, but that they could get more product yield from using your product, and then the upstream channel that is used to deliver their product to market that is making the larger profit can make larger profits, or reduce the amount of cost of throwaway, then that's very compelling, right? So the end farmer may not pay for it, but the person upstream from the end farmer that's importing or taking those materials and to then sell to a mass market will be very motivated by some of that stuff.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's switch back to the deck here. So that's a good review. All right, so we have our guest speakers coming in soon, about 10 minutes. I want to try to get this through, but we're not going to rush it. If you have questions, please ask me, but this is one of those very critical points. Also, it's going to be very important as you take the first three components that we talked about and move it into this fourth component, which is the value proposition. And that's really, we're going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about benefits, pains and gains of customers.
Brian, are you going to go over Team 3's homework by chance, or no?
Oh, wait, did I not? I thought I did on Team 3. Okay, hang on a second. I will definitely do Team 3's. Hold on.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's my bad. Okay, Team 3. Okay, and again, great pass. And I promise I won't rush through this. Okay, so we'll spend enough time that we need for this. I think this is really good. So we talked, when I was looking at this earlier, I like how you kind of took the approach about the segmentation. The first target the larger chemical companies, persuade the manufacturer a compound instead of the PYR3. Also the secondary, the demographic about aftermarket, more research is conducted on the compound. It is possible that it would be used as a novel treatment for epilepsy. Okay, so you kind of, right. So your product and your solution is going to hopefully lead to, what I would love to say is, a cure for epilepsy, or at least a treatment for epilepsy, right? If I understand it kind of correctly. And you can correct me afterwards if I'm wrong, because I'm just still trying to get educated on all three of these IPs as we move along too. So the segmentation is the chemical companies is what you're saying is kind of the first. So you feel like you can sell your product to these chemical companies, and let's see, it was safer alternative to researchers already interested in TRPC-C3, the trickle down method. Okay. And secondly, after more research is conducted on the compound, it is possible that it would be used as a novel treatment for epilepsy. Okay. So I don't really know if these are, I kind of understand the chemical companies. I don't know who the customer is in this kind of secondary thing here. It could be the patient with epilepsy, and someone, if they want to come off the mute and kind of help me with that, that'd be great. But it's like, which ones do you think are your primary customers that are going to get your product into market? Is that the chemical companies as partners?
Yeah, so I think we struggled a little bit with like the customer segmentation types, but the personas helped kind of clarify that a little bit. So we were thinking like chemical companies would be kind of like one market, and then doctors and insurance companies would be the other market. So that would be like the two segments would be the firmographic as chemical companies, and the demographic as almost patients and that sort of route.
Okay. let me actually jump down here. So for patients, maybe for patients who are currently unable to achieve seizure freedom with the currently available ASM, JW65 represents an alternative candidate for the treatment of recurrent seizures. JW65 targets a receptor previously unexplored in epileptic conditions that has shown great promise in not only reducing seizure severity, but the frequency of seizure attacks as well. Unlike other medications that are proved ineffective for a large portion of epilepsy patients, well, I think we got an imposed thing there. JW65 provides a novel mechanism for treatment of seizures. In doing this, JW65 may lessen the number of patients suffering from intractable seizures. Okay, this is a really good solution statement, right? It sets up your product well. It talks about the area of exposure of where you're kind of talking about, and it does talk about how that this could be an alternative candidate for the treatment of recurrent seizures. I mean, I think this is kind of in detail enough, and it's not overly technical, right? It just kind of jump in there and say what your product will do and where the promise is. And I think that's really good. I would kind of maybe reclassify some of the words of may and stuff like that, like at the end. I mean, you don't want to say it will, right? But I do think that, just kind of leaning into what the outcome you hope will be is fine at this point, right? But again, I would also avoid saying that you're going to cure epilepsy if that's not actually the case. But then the rest of this, unlike other medications that have proved, and then here, I mean, you kind of talked very, a little bit succinctly about how these other solutions are ineffective. I'm not sure I'm not seeing anything in here like a buzzword or two why they're ineffective. So you might want to talk about that, expand a little bit. I always like to have all of my 60-second pitch to drop in just like seeds of discontent on behalf of my competitors, right? Or the products that are already in the market, right? Just little bitty droplets of negativity about those, right? Wherever I can, not overly burdensome in that way, but just kind of wherever I can get a chance to take a lick at somebody that's in my competition space, I'm going to do so, but subtly and kind of seed planting wise in here. So I think this is a good pass. I can see where it would be a little bit of a struggle to kind of figure out exactly where the customer segmentation is. Going back to something I said last week, taking the path of trying to follow your product through a complete journey cycle of its life, right? Of every part of your product, every place it touches, every person it touches, every channel that it goes through. That's a good method of saying, okay, well, if this is the complete journey of my product as I know it today, and that might change over time, but as I know it today, then this person or this group or this organization is in this category, and this one is a partner, and this one's a partner, and this one's a channel provider for whatever, that actually helps you kind of classify who those are, and then also the value proposition areas for them. So that's just another method of kind of driving to that customer segmentation. But team 3, you did a great job. I think this is very good. Everybody did a great job. I don't throw praises out for no reason. I'm telling you all did really, really great work of this last week. Any questions from team 3?
Yeah, so kind of going off of your comment about, I don't want to say like digging at other companies or other products.
Mm-hmm.
Our product or our compound is similar but different. And so that's why we try to keep it relatively broad, because it typically follows the same mechanism as drugs that are already available on the market, but it's targeting something that is novel. And so we were trying to say that it's ineffective. But do you think so? The population of epileptics that we're hoping to target is this 30 to 40% of patients who are unable to achieve seizure freedom. And the reason that they're unable to achieve seizure freedom is typically unknown. They just are not responsive to the current standard of drugs, the ASMs, the anti-seizure medication.
Yeah.
And this would provide a new target that maybe would hopefully decrease their seizure activity.
Then let me recast what I'm thinking here because of what you just said. It's like, if I heard you right, it's like you don't feel like you have to say anything about the quote unquote competitive space, because it's not really competitive. There just seems to be patients that aren't receptive to the current models or products that are already out there because you feel like there's a receptor that you can tap into with your product, the JW65, that will be more effective in giving them as close to a seizure-free life as they possibly can. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would say that. I mean, you don't have to use those words. What I would say is, and I appreciate you kind of pushing back on that. It's like, I get it now, right? It's not about painting a picture, and this is for everybody, right? It's not about painting a picture of what's bad in the market already. Maybe it's something that's missing in the market, right? All the competitors, all the other people, and maybe they're not competitors, all the other solutions are good in what they do, but those solutions don't tap into the specific thing for this group of patients that are unable to get to seizure freedom. And so where our novel approach does is it actually attracts to one receptor that will allow for these individuals to reach that freedom. That's a great way of just kind of saying it's just not out there yet, and we're going to be the first ones.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So good job. Great question. Thanks for the pushback too. I love being challenged when I'm not thinking about something correctly, and I really appreciate that. So that's great. Okay, now let me go. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about value proposition. Let's see. Okay. All right. So value proposition. All right. So to get started, this is like, what's my benefit from using your solution? That's the big thing. A value proposition is tied directly to the person receiving the product, receiving the service, or utilizing that, or experiencing that, whatever you want to think about it. But that's the person that has to find the value, and they have to derive it almost on their own. A few things like that are valuable kind of slap you across the face that people really will a part of the everyday life. It can't be the obvious thing. Some of these things that when people implement things and are daily users of something, it's something that they never guessed they would get that kind of benefit from. Now, not every product is that great and can meet something that's completely unmet before, but the idea there is to try to get your customer to feel the benefits, to realize those benefits. They're almost tangible to them. If they're not tangible to them, then they have a high likelihood of flying away, right? Because it's not something that they're aware of, that it's benefiting from them. And some things they might not necessarily be aware of it, but you got to make them aware of it, right? Like, you need this for this reason. So as we move into this, customer needs, the identification of those customer needs, that's what you've done through some of the guesswork above or below before this. But now we're talking about the need to actually start getting out there and validating your theories and your hypothesis. And that's the important part, right? This is the part where I tell people that I'm teaching that you're going to have to go talk to first 10 people and then come back to me and tell me what you found, then another 20, then another 30. And then the next thing, now you're another 40, and now you're at 100. And then we look at the data across the board and all the theories that we tested and all the hypotheses that we proved or didn't prove. And then we look at all that and see what we've come up with in the end, right? Hopefully it's something that truly meets the benefits of that a customer is looking for. So you really have to understand through customer discovery, what does each type of customer need from your solution? And that goes back to what we were just saying about trying to identify that initial beachhead, right? Trying to find that person or that group or that organization or that firm or company that's going to need your product the most. So what does they need, and what does each type of customer need that might be in a multi-segment type approach too? What is a job that needs to be performed, right? What is your product or service going to do for that person? And then what are the pains and gains experienced by the customer based on the problem at hand? That's what you have to discover through this process. You can make theories all day long, but until you get out there and say, I need to understand this, and talking to these specific types of customers that you have a job or a solution for them, and that they understand what the pains and gains are and can quantify the alleviation and the gain of something, or the newly given gain, then that's where the value propositions are going to be derived from. All right. So that's all about where, we need to get to. Now, I'm going to pivot right now because I don't want to hold up the guest speaker, Dawn Norman, who's coming in from MRC Global. So I'm going to just hand it over to her. I'm going to bring her in right now and make an announcement, and then we'll come back to value propositions and intellectual property afterwards. Hey, Dawn, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Hey, Dawn, welcome. Thank you very much. We've been doing our classwork, and we're going to take a small break for this very important guest speaker here. Dawn Norman is from MRC Global. We've been working with them for a number of years now. They are a great go-to group of individuals to help with things around regulatory. They have a lot of things that they're working on as well. I mean, this is a company that kind of can really talk about this space really well, and they've always done a great job, and we're very appreciative of them. So this is the Scipreneur Challenge 2022. This year, Dawn, as opposed to last year, it was the Memphis Scipreneur Challenge. This year, it's the Tennessee Scipreneur Challenge. We've brought in a couple more entities trying to actually do a statewide thing like this every year. So this is our first go at it. But it's pretty much the same format. We go through several weeks of learning how to be entrepreneurs, hopefully taking what they're working on with the intellectual property and seeking ways to do some commercialization with that. This time we have 3 great areas of intellectual property. We have 3 teams with several people on each team working on it. And let me tell you, I just went over their homework with them. They are doing a great job. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good effort going on so far. So you got a good audience in front of you. Do you need to share any slides?
Yeah, let me get there. And I thought I was ready, and then I realized I have way too many screens up. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I just made you co-host, so you can share when you get there.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let me just get that going and switch display swap. Now, hopefully I can do this other part correctly. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep,
okay.
We sure can.
Fantastic, great. All right, well, it sounds like you guys have had a busy beginning of the year, and we're, happy to bring content of, around the regulations around medical devices, primarily medical devices, but also biologics and tissues. And so what we're going to talk about today is really just an introduction to working inside of a regulated space. So we'll talk about some strategy and planning information, with a focus on medical device and FDA, a little bit about labeling, and then how to classify your products, what basic submissions are about, and that's just getting your product through FDA. Once you have it through FDA, then you have to operate as a medical device manufacturer or under at least good manufacturing practices. And we'll talk really high level about design controls and some risk management topics, basic quality systems, because again, you have to work under good manufacturing processes. It's also code quality systems. And then some just general information on enforcement acts. Okay, and then we'll make sure that you get copies of these slides at the end. If you have a specific question as we go through, I'm going to clip through this pretty fast, but just someone ring a bell or do something, because you're over to my left, so I won't be able to see you exactly if you're just waving your hands. So do just speak up and take yourself off mute. Okay. All right. So regulatory strategy. It really is, what do you what is your product? Is it a drug? Is it a device, software, cosmetic, tissue, and what is it intended to do? Is it intended to treat a fracture, or is it to diagnose something? Is it to mitigate something? We'll come to that word in a little bit. Who will it be used on, and who will it be used by? So as you know, a long time ago, everyone used to think that just medical devices are what doctors use. Well, medical devices can be on your wrist, right? It can be your at-home blood pressure cuff. It's the toothbrush that you use every morning and every night. So it's something where medical devices are in our homes all the time, and we have to evaluate who's not only who's it being used on, who's it being used by. And in today's world of Wi-Fi and just electrical products being around us everywhere, we also have to think about where we are in the environment. Okay. And then also, what do you want to say about the product? And we'll get more to this, but it's just kind of like Are you just going to say that it treats something, or do you want to say that it does something better than what maybe the standard of care is today? And if you're going to say that, there's some additional information you're going to have to go out and get. So whenever you think through what is your product, what do you want to say it does, who's using it, then we got to look at how is it regulated by the FDA. There's different classifications on how things get classified and what FDA has to review or wants to review. And then based on all these questions that we've asked, then that drives which data are going to be required. Everything from your normal performance testing, maybe some usability or simulated use, some human factors, maybe you need preclinical work, and you might even need clinical studies. What this bakes down to is it is about safety and effectiveness of your product. But whenever we're looking at this from an entrepreneurial and a business side, it's all about time and money. And so we really encourage you to look at your regulatory strategies early so that you can figure out how much time and money it takes to get all of this data in the fourth bullet point in order to support this, what you want to say that it does in the second bullet point. And that takes time and money. So other encouraging things about what you, whenever you're an entrepreneur and looking at new inventions or taking new products to market, what's your end goal? Do you want to become a manufacturer and actually distribute the device itself? Do you want to be that company that does that? Do you just want to be the specification and specification developer and you know, but just have your name on the product, but then you have other distributors who do this for you? Do you just want to sell the rights of your product? You may want to have an invention and then have somebody else be responsible for manufacturing it and really take on that load, and you just hold that more of that patent right or that regulatory right. And this is really the kind of same thing. There's one thing where you sell the rights of your product of who do you know, you have a patent and then someone else is going to go do a whole bunch of regulatory work. Or are you going to do the regulatory work and receive a potential 510K or a PMA or something and then sell the rights and the submission? And so it's something where these things become assets as you achieve them and they have value to them. And all of these questions impact the overall time and cost. So, and depending on what you're doing, you know, you may need parts of a quality system. You may need the beginning part. You may need all of it. Just depends on what you want. All right, so definitions. I'm going to not read all of this to you, but I do want to go through the fact that a drug, and drugs were first regulated by FDA before devices or biologics. They're articles intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. So interestingly, devices basically, instead of our articles, they're instruments, apparatus, implements, machines, implants, etc., in vitro reagents, or similar related articles, which again, the intended use is to do the exact same thing that the drug was doing. So one of the things that we're you know, coming across over the last 15, 20, 25 years is that not all products, especially medical devices, actually diagnose, they don't actually cure, or they don't actually treat, or they don't actually present. There's a lot of devices that fit with this within this mitigation space. And I would bet that some of you are probably going to sit in that space, especially if you're bringing some sort of software or algorithm to the party where they're, you know, making an evaluation of data or something like that. Biologics are really broad. I think I just say all cells lead to biologics. So it's something where if you have a cellular product or a growth factor or protein, anything that is related in the cellular space and is going to end up being called a biologic, but it will be regulated as a drug or a device depending on the mode of action. So if it's got a chemical action, it's probably a drug. If it has a physical action, it's probably going to be a device. All right. So earlier I asked the question, what's an intended use? All right, well, what's your intended use? So just remember, the intended use means the general purpose of the device and its function, and it includes the indications. That indications describes the disease or the condition that the device will diagnose, treat, or cure, etc. And it includes the description of the patient population. So a couple of examples. Indications for use are they stabilizing fractures, right? That could be a bone screw for healing. It could be stabilizing fractures, could be long bone fractures, could be hand fractures. It just depends on the size and the and the specificity of the screw. Could also be diagnosis, excuse me, a microbe, and in this case, we're going to say strep A. So those are indications for use. Oftentimes, we'll even, depending on the product, we might even put in pediatrics in adults, or we may say in adolescents and adults, or adults only. So it just depends on what's really going on in that space for the product, but oftentimes we will often call out even the patient age population. So those are indications. And that's, kind of a very nice flat statement. But I also had asked earlier, it's like, well, do you want to say something else about your product? And what marketing or clinical claims do you want? Do you want to say that it helps your fractures heal faster? Or that it diagnoses strep with a 10% more sensitivity than others? All of those claims require data, and they all require data to support that. So in these cases with clinical claims, you're going to have to support it with clinical data. And it doesn't mean that you have to come to FDA with those claims at the very beginning, but if you're going to market with them, you've got to have the data to back you up. So I'm just going to stop right there. Any quick questions here? All right, I'm going to keep going. So as we start talking through this, and as you work in this space, we talk about labeling. And whenever we talk about labeling, we don't just mean the sticker that goes on the product or the sticker that goes on the package. Yes, a label must be affixed to the product, and it must consider your UDI, which is unique device identifier, and a global, which I apologize, don't remember. I think it's a global term identification number requirements. But labeling also includes your instructions for use or a package insert. If there's a surgical and removal technique, maybe a user guide or instruction manual. So all of this is considered labeling. Your website is considered labeling. The flyers that you make are considered labeling. So all of this may have the claims on there, but we will say that there's also something called off-label promotion, which means that if you in your labeling, if you are not making the correct claims or the correct intended use that you have been cleared or approved by FDA to make, that's considered off-label promotion. And this all shows up under the guise of labeling. So when we talk about labeling, we're talking about everything from the label to the user guide to your website to even social media. Okay. So examples of a medical device, I kind of talked about this earlier. Yes, manual toothbrushes are medical devices, and they are very, very specific in how they are defined. Now, what I don't show you here is there's actually a second one of these for electric toothbrushes. So there are sometimes whenever we get into a space, and depending on what your product is, we can very clearly say, this is exactly, you fit exactly into this regulatory space. But there's plenty of other times whenever you don't fit exactly in there, and there's a gray space, and that's what our job is to help you navigate that and find the right home for a product. So some really basics on classification. So there's class 1 products that are exempt from pre-marketing submission. Pre-marketing submission means that FDA reviews this. So They're required to have just some general controls for quality systems, and we'll talk more about this in a minute. Class 2 products require pre-market submission, and they get a pre-market clearance whenever you might be using the word FDA approved, but if you're class 2, you're actually getting FDA cleared. And so we specifically speak this way, and it indicates that, hey, if I'm FDA cleared, I have a class 2 device and I have a 510K. Class 3 requires pre-market approval. That is, and so just to go back to this, this FDA does review this, but they do not review it as stringently as they review a class 3 product. And that requires, and you gain a pre-market approval. So we're going to go through a little bit more details here. So some examples: a class 1 product could be that manual toothbrush or the electronic toothbrush that we had earlier, a screwdriver from an instrument set, even a vein viewer that is electromechanical, light-based with firmware and software can be a class 1 device. But, but this means that they are considered low-risk devices to the agency, and they do not require that they see any information from you. Class 2 devices are considered more significant risk, but there are similar products on the market already established that they are safe and effective or previously reviewed by the agency. And so as long as you are, as long as you can demonstrate through a 510K submission that you are substantially equivalent, you don't have to be identical, but you have to be substantially equivalent to another product that's already cleared on the market, then you would work towards your 510K. And again, if you fit in that regulation in code. PMAs, class 3, these require a lot of information. Not only do they require just basic data, performance data, but they're more likely, they always require clinical data. So just a quick touch point as far as pricing. This just kind of SBD means small business designation. If your company makes under, I think, $100 million gross, then you can qualify for this, but you've got to apply for it. And it's relatively easy to do. But you can see the pricing for a 510K. It's pretty reasonably priced for the FDA to review this is $3,000. But PMAs, even as a small business designation, they are, they're very, very expensive. Now, I will say that these are last year's numbers. 2022 has new numbers, but this gives you just kind of the scope and the differential. Do know that, that if for some reason you do a class 3, your very first one is exempt from the fee. But if you have a second one, then you have to pay the fee as well. But there are additional annual fees that you definitely have to pay, no matter if it's your first or second. So if there's questions, and if you're not really, really clear on where you sit with the agency, they have something called a request for designation, and it's called a 513G. And it is something where you can go in and describe your product for them, and they will give you, they will give you their determination of where you sit. For de novo classifications, this is something that is relatively new, and it's something where I guess in the last 10 years it's new, we'll put it that way. But what was happening is that we had a lot of products coming in, and whenever a product is new, and FDA has never seen anything like it before, it is automatically classified as a class 3 product. It's already a PMA. But let's say it's a novel kind of software or something like that, where it doesn't really impact the body like a pacemaker does, but it's still high enough risk because it's got algorithms in it and it's helping clinicians make decisions. So FDA basically developed this de novo classification of new, where it is a request to basically, excuse me, you're requesting the agency to down classify your product from class 3 to a class 2 or a class 1 device. This is like a 510K on steroids, basically. Sometimes clinical studies are required, and there's a little bit of extra information that they want in there. Just to kind of align things for you across the world in a global sense, this is how the world looks at things as far as class 1, 2, and 3 in the US. EU has, granted, they have several more class 1s now with some recent regulatory changes, but basically they have 4 primary classifications. Canada has 4 classifications. Australia will follow Europe most of the time. And then there's Japan. So quickly, again, class 1, whenever we say class 1 exemptions, again, they do not require the submission to the FDA except for IVDs. So that strep test I was talking about earlier is a class 1 product, but it requires a 510K. And so if you have a class 1 product, when you are ready to market your device, you must register the company with the FDA as an establishment. You would call yourself whatever you are, whether you're a specification developer, the actual physical manufacturer of the product. There's a few other things that are required, but you would register with the FDA. That is, $5,300 a year, no matter how many products you have. You have to list the device with FDA. That's you basically telling them, hey, I'm now the manufacturer of screwdrivers. And you must be compliant with the general controls of what we talked about earlier, the quality system, 21 CFR 820. So class 1 products are exempt from design controls. We will always tell you that it is important, though, to implement some type of design control light. The US is really the only one that allows you not to have design controls for your class 1 products. All the other countries, because of the quality system regulations that they have, require you to have design controls even on class 1 products. So it is an asset and a value for you to go ahead and at least have, again, design control, what we call light, on a class 1 product. And even if it's something where you're anticipating that you're going to sell off or license out your product, the bigger companies in this space, they want to come in and see that you've got your stuff together and that you're really well organized, and that they're not going to have to remediate your paperwork. And that will help you tremendously whenever it comes to being able to negotiate the value of your design history file. So on class 2, we talked about it a little bit about substantial equivalence. Again, the device must be safe and effective and substantially equivalent to a legally marketed device. This is all based on the intended use, which we talked about earlier, and the technological characteristics of the device. So if the intended use of my product is for removal of tattoos, one is by laser, but the other is by, I don't know, high intensity focused ultrasound. You are not going to be able to leverage one off of the other, because even though the intended use is the same, the technological characteristics are different, even though you're using some sort of ablative therapy, but they're very different in how they work. So they're going to want to regulate those different. So these technological characteristics do have to be similar. And what are you similar to? You're similar to a predicate device. And these are all the devices that are cleared through the 510K process, and they have to tie back to a pre-amendment device. So basically since 1976, the FDA started reviewing devices when the amendment came. And they kind of made a list pre-76, they say, well, these devices we feel are acceptable. And then they've been building this basic database of what device, what devices are considered safe and effective. And just over time, this database is continuing to get bigger and bigger. And this is where we find all of our class 1, 2, and 3 codes. So some basics about 510Ks. There's a traditional 510K that has a 90-day active review time. Active review time means it's the time that on the clock that the agency is specifically looking at your file. And excuse me. So whenever we say this is a traditional 90-day, this is only the time that they are actively looking at it. It's not the time that you've got to respond and go get additional data or anything like that. So as you're building your project timelines and these types of things, do not put a 510K, only takes 90 days. It doesn't. It takes about 6 months from the time you submit to the time you get your clearance on average. So we're just putting this in as they promote that they have a 90-day active review time, which they do, but this is only the time that they say their clock is on and not the time that you're taking to respond to their questions. There's also something called a special 510K. It has a 30-day active review time, but it's only for modifications to existing systems. So after you get your first 510K, if you have minor enough changes, then you might be able to notify the agency with a special 510K. There is something called an abbreviated 510K, but it's really not used. But if you are off researching 510Ks, you'll run into this language. Super quick contents of a 510K. I'm going to say there's a whole bunch of administrative paperwork. Imagine that, it's the government. But we also have to provide labeling. We talked about labeling earlier, description of the device, engineering drawings. They want to see your specifications and they want to see your high and mid-level assemblies. And depending on the product, if it's software, they're going to want to see your algorithms. They're going to want to understand your math. The component list, so your SKUs, how, do you have a size 6? Do you have a size 10? Do you have a size 15? Comparison of the statement to a legally marketed device. So this is your predicate. And we're going to have a comparison table of how your design features, indications, and the testing that you have compared to the predicate, and demonstrate that it's substantially equivalent. Clearly, we've got a little bit of a duplication here. Sorry about that. A big topic today, biocompatibility. This is definitely a big topic where the agency will want you to address biocompatibility, even if it is, that will make you want to say a statement, even if it's the same material as this cup and that I use every day. And, but you know that you will have to somehow evaluate biocompatibility. Okay, so again, a lot of technical paperwork and that you guys really don't need to worry about, but more the supporting data here of mechanical testing, clinical evidence if needed. Every once in a while 510K needs it, but not usually. Animal studies, that can happen. And then any validations. So these could be software validations. It could be fill validations. It just depends on what the product is doing. If you're doing a special 510K, there's a summary of design controls and a risk analysis that goes in there too. And again, you're all going to get these slides, so don't scramble. All right. So how this works, there's something called you submit, and they do this administrative check for about 15 days, and they have 15 days to respond to you and tell you that that you've got administratively all the boxes are ticked and that you've submitted everything you were supposed to do. After they can kick it back to you and ask you to do some fixes, but once you've got everything in, they will accept it, and then that clock starts, that 90-day clock starts that we talked about. So after about 60 days, there's can be a request for additional information, and we call them AI letters, or they'll call them AINN letters. And this is where they come back and they're just, dear Dawn, we'd like to see this list of information from you. There may be a question about your testing, there's a gap in your testing, we don't understand what this means, et cetera, et cetera. You get 180 calendar days to respond to all of their questions. You cannot submit piecemeal where you just say, oh, well, here's the answer to number 3 and number 5. You have to respond to all of the questions at once. So just know that whatever that long poll is in the testing, that that's the long poll, and you want to work with whatever testing or additional information that you have to grab. You want to work with that as quickly but thoroughly as possible, because once the clock sets, or once you send your response back in, the clock resets back to day 61, let's say, and they pick up their clock again, and now they only have 30 days to review your data and make a determination as to whether or not you are substantially equivalent. If you're not substantially equivalent and you run out of time, if you run out of time in this 180 days, or they said, listen, you don't have the right data, they'll offer for you to withdraw the submission. Or you can get a letter that says not substantially equivalent. So a lot of times people say, well, can't I just write a letter to file or do some internal documentation? And if you've been reading FDA guidances, there's one about changes. And once you have your 510K, when do you have to submit changes? And so it's something where the change to internal documentation is just something that is all the testing and the rationales as to why this change can happen and why I don't have to submit it to the agency with a new 510K, either through that traditional or the special submissions. So it's that change in product that does not affect the labeled indication or the product's operating principle. So there could be changes in existing part numbers, as well as the creation of new part numbers, but you got to be in the block of the range. So if I had previously size 6 through 15, I can add a 7, I can add a 14, I can add a 10, and not have to tell FDA as long as I haven't changed any of the other important form factors. But if I want to add a 5 or a 16 and go outside that approved envelope or cleared envelope, then I've got to go back to the agency and tell them that I'm going to expand that. The reason why they do this is because we compare it to the original 510K, and we have to validate and explain why, the bookends, basically, which are important for worst case scenarios. So the agency will always expect that if you have a range of product or a range of situations, that you're always testing to the worst case scenario. All right, so a few little tidbits as you're going through this. Probably a lot of your products probably fit inside a class 1 or a class 2 space. How do you find out where you fit? You can go into the FDA database, and there are classification databases called a product code database, and you can search this for product code IQE. It's going to come up as a back brace. There's a 510K database where you can search by company names or product codes, previous 510K numbers. You can also look at competition, that people who are currently marketing product and review their establishment registrations and their product classifications of similar devices. So there's a variety of different ways to do these searches, but it will all help you to figure out where you fit in the regulated space. All right, so now we're going to talk about investigational device exemptions. And this is typically for class 3 devices, because we're going to move into those pretty quickly here. So clinical studies are usually required for class 3 devices or novel class 2s. We talked about that de novo path earlier. when you're going to do a clinical study, you have to determine whether or not your study is a significant risk device study or a non-significant risk device study. If it is a significant risk device study, then you have to have an investigational device exemption. And if you say that it's a non-significant risk device study, and an IRB, Institutional Review Board, is what that is at the clinical sites or university, says no, we still want the FDA to look at it, then you're back here to the investigational device exemption. This is a submission where the agency reviews the preliminary safety and effectiveness of the device to ensure that you can put it into humans, because you're going to go collect the clinical data actually to support the claims of the safety and effectiveness. So there are opportunities where you can do what we call pre-IDE meetings. These are called pre-submission meetings, and go talk to the agency to make sure that you've designed the protocol the way that you needed to. Excuse me. And it's important that you do that, because you don't want to go design, you don't want to run a clinical study and not have the FDA approve it. And then we have IRB approval is also required. We talked about non-significant risk, but do know that you do have to include the protocols and study design for the review. Okay, excuse me. So I'm going to quickly go through class 3 market approvals, because I think we're getting close on time. And Brian, you just tell me if I'm running out of time, please. So class 3, there are 2 types where you submit standard everything all at once, or modular, where you submit piecemeal and you negotiate that with the agency in advance. So they require clinical data. Know that they will inspect your manufacturing sites. All of your validations must be submitted. Submission fee, we talked about this earlier, now over 300,000. And then there's different ways. So they have a 180-day clock for their active review time, of which they will stop that and frequently and ask a lot of questions. So they go back and forth a lot. I'm not going to go through what everything is required inside the PMA, but this will be inside your inside the slides. I think the biggest thing for you to remember here is that they also look at the manufacturing information, which they did not look for in a 510K. And I apologize, I'm developing a cold. All right. So one of the things we do want to, we talked a little bit that it's 180-day review time after the receipt of the last information. And so it's something where for that last information, that can be the last part of the module. So just know that just because you've submitted it early doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily always start early on that review. But overall, it takes about 9 months to 1.5 years of going back and forth with the agency from the time that you submit. You can request a 100-day meeting with them to go over issues. If you have a PMA, this is you have a lot of post-approval obligations, PMA annual reports, other specific approval requirements. There could be other post-approval studies. There could be definitely a lot of these things are additional costs. So just know that if you are developing something that is going to be regulated as class 3, it can be extremely expensive and laborious from a regulatory side. That's not to say that it's not doable. We support these on a regular basis, but there's just not a lot of people who have these out there. Pre-submissions or Q submissions, this is what I referred to previously as a pre-IDE. This is that formal discussion with FDA. You can take in questions about, what testing, your testing plans and asking if your testing plans are adequate. You can talk to them about your clinical studies. You can talk to them about, do they agree with your regulatory approach? There is no user fee, which is great. You still have to pay the cost if you have a consultant like me, or for your own time and money, but the FDA doesn't ask you for money to talk to them. And they can be face-to-face, which is now not real. There's Zoom, if you're lucky that they get on a Zoom call, a teleconference, or email feedback. But these are extremely helpful, and FDA has actually began to rely on them, I think, a little too much. They'll say, well, you can come back and talk to us more through another pre-submission, which we don't really want to do sometimes. Quickly, combination products. Sometimes products fall inside both a drug device, drug biologic, or device biologic. It all depends on, it all depends on that mode of action and what the primary mode of action is. And so it's something where we deal with a lot of device biologics or device drugs where the primary mode of action happens to be, we'll say, like a spinal cage that goes in, but then maybe there's a growth factor or recombinant protein that is sitting inside that spinal cage to help promote osteogenesis and bone formation. So the first spinal cage is the primary mode of action because it's holding two vertebral bodies in place and then allowing the fusion to happen. And then the drug or the biologic inside that is just helping to accelerate bony fusion. So that's one example. You will always want, you don't have to get a request for designation, but you will always want to be really clear on how the agency is going to regulate your primary mode of action, and how, if your drug or if your product is going to sit first as a drug or as a or as a device. Couple of other considerations. So all correspondence with FDA should be documented and kept in your submission files, both formal and informal. Trust me, you'll go back to them later, or your consultant will ask you for it, because we wanted to understand that history. Keep all submission history, including NSEs. That's non-substantially equivalent. If FDA denies your 510K, just know that that does not become public. But you do want to keep all this history. Consider competitive clearances whenever you're doing submissions. Look at those databases that we talked about. Look at what other people are having to experience in the last 5 years, because that's going to give you the flavor of the type of the testing and that you're going to have to do. Because if you're looking back at something that's 15 years old, the agencies, they've just they have become more modern as well, and they expect better testing today too. So last note, testing to consider no matter what your classification. You're going to have understand your biocompatibility. Even if you're class 1, you're going to, but you're electrical, you need to have electrical safety testing and EMC, interference testing. If you have software or firmware counts as software in FDA, you need to have software validation. In some cases, you may need to have human factors testing, which is, we call it usability off to the side. It's not just about ergonomics. It's, are your instructions for use, your labeling, your training, are they in fact effective to make sure that the patient will not be harmed, and that the users really know how to use your product. Software validate or sterilization validations, as well as packaging. So we talked about establishment registration. It's currently about $5,300, and it doesn't matter if you have 1 device or if you have 10. And then your device listings, again, you can put all of them in there. So something important to remember whenever you communicate to your investors, do incorporate your regulatory plan into that business plan, because we're costing you time and money. Do your market research, know your patient population, or have your strategy of how you're going to approach different patient populations, as well as your users. Like, I even did this, and it's like used a tiered strategy, because going in for all the bells and whistles all at once with all the patient populations, you can do it, but it's going to take a long time. So it's okay, build a strategy where you can put in your primary product without the bells and whistles, and build upon yourself, utilizing yourself as a predicate and others, and then bring in that extra bell and whistle. Really, you're in early, go shop. Know how much things are going to cost. Biocompatibilities and chemical characterization is getting more and more expensive. And then do your reimbursement research. It's great that you've created something, but who's going to pay for it? And that is just as critical as getting it through the FDA. So with that, I've been talking a long time. I'm going to stop and let you guys ask questions.
You have time for about 1 or 2 questions. If you are on mute and wanting to ask, please come off mute. Well, Dawn, I think it's because you did such an extensive job of telling us all about the regulatory aspects of things they need to consider. I mean, you did a great job of covering all things. We do have a couple of drug things and a couple of other applications or one other application in the agricultural space, all of which are going to need to go through kind of a regulatory process. For all those on the call, I mean, MRC Global that's what they're here for, right? That's what this is, part of what they do is kind of help people like yourselves understand what the space is, right? And help you walk through it in those cases as well. So this is really great information. Her presentation will be in our Google Drive. So you'll have access to that. Also, remember that all these videos, all these sessions are videoed and recorded. And so they're going to be up on YouTube later on this evening as well. So you can always refer back and see this information again. Dawn, thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely. And, we are based in Memphis, on the west side of the state. And I know that this is a stateside thing, but, if people want to meet, we're happy to meet, whether virtually or here in Memphis. We do get to Nashville as well. So, we strangely cover and work with a lot of groups in Arkansas as well, if someone is, maybe kind of moving around a lot. So, just let us know if you need something. So, all right.
Really
well,
appreciate
thank you.
it. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Okay, so let's we can wrap up in 27 minutes for sure on the rest of the stuff we want to talk about, but it's all very important and valuable stuff, so I do want to cover it. All right, so we just talked about the value proposition and setting that this process of setting the value proposition, focusing on the customer types, trying to quantify the job, the solution that they're going to need, and then really most importantly understanding the pains and the gains. And general performance features alone are not going to be great benefit to customers, not exclusively at least. So discussing features as they are and as they're in the individual pieces of the part, of the overall product is not necessarily a benefit, right? It's not necessarily specifically related to pains and gains. And we'll talk about this more as we progress through this, but like I see a lot of other entrepreneurs and other founders sometimes showing their features as value propositions. And that's not actually a one-for-one conclusion of what a customer is going to receive by actually utilizing your complete product, right? So generally features are not those parts of the value proposition that you start talking about. Okay, so all right, so moving on, feature to value matching. You got to match your feature sets to the pains and gains, but it's an overall, and you can't just look at the features alone. That's what it just talks about, right? It's the overall set of features, right? And that's important. It's not individual features. It's a set of features that deliver an experience. It's either alleviating a pain or providing a gain. We've talked about this a lot. You've heard me talk about pains and gains over and over again. So that's what we're trying to do with the value proposition is understand what will we create a pain reliever and a gain creator. And that's very important. Do this for each customer type identified. So as you segmentize your customers into these logical groups, for whatever reason they are logically grouped, then you need to figure out what the value proposition is for each. You also need to put them in kind of a linear progression a lot of times where one will come before the next and so on and so forth. And as you capture more segmentations, you capture more market, you actually can build upon each segmentation and maybe each segmentation needs the next one, right? And so they're connected, they're interdependent with each other. And maybe one really facilitates the next. And that's something you have to understand too. And that's something you really have to understand at the earlier stages. It's not one of those things like, well, we'll just cover that ground when we get to it. You got to have that path, right? And again, that's the journey. There's a journey of the experience, but then there's a journey of the product. And of course, you're not going to know every part, every stop, every milestone of the journey, but you can speculate at this time, right? You can speculate around the customers. You can do the early research to kind of figure out what those pains and gains are for each one of those things, and then assess those over time. Okay, that's a really important advantage. Also, like not talking about individual features, it's also benefits are not like we do it better than them. That's not a benefit, right? That might be the end result, but that's not the benefit that actually is going to be specifically talking to someone's need for a pain relief or a gain creation, right? So avoid using competitive advantage. That's completely different. That's something that probably not your end users are overly worried about, of how well you do across the board against someone else, right? It's really about what specifically you can point at them that says, these are the benefits you're going to gain from this. It's also important to know the competitive landscape, and certainly investors want to know the competitive landscape. If you haven't done that research, then that's a very important thing to do in that regard as well. But, and then of course, it's also important to you to understand where you need to be competitive with those things, and where those areas you need to out execute. But again, those competitive advantages aren't actually the benefits, right? They should be the delineations, differentiations, not the ones that are for the individual customers at the end. All right. And then again, as we've talked about this over and over again, it's like validation. This is all about making up, taking your assumptions, which are not bad, categorizing those into kind of what my theories and hypothesis is going to be in order for me to test and validate my expectations, right? So test your value propositions and assumptions with early adopters. These are the ones that probably might be in your peripheral space, in your sphere, or maybe related in an extended sphere of people in that same space. But it also is people like you, right? Or people that are on the other side of your customer base that are like you, that would need something like this and are willing to kind of test out things that may not be fully tested. Early adopters are your initial beachhead. These are the ones that are going to jump to it rather quickly, and you can do a lot of testing with those. So validating your value propositions by actually interacting with these people that you perceive to be early adopters is a great way to validate what you're looking at and what you're trying to do, and also try to win over some champions in that regard too. Also validate with each customer segment targets that may be influenced by early adopters. So what happens after the early adopters? What's the next group down there? And I have a tool in the toolkit called Crossing the Chasm. It really talks about these segmentations of market types, right? So early adopters, innovators, early majority, late majority, and so on and so forth. And then continue to validate your value propositions for each major release that you do. So, I mean, like if you have, and just an example here, a software product or some sort of algorithm, as it advances itself, you need to validate those value propositions back against the theories originally or the new ones that you've come up with, to continuously make sure that the value propositions are being delivered to the customer. And what you'll find over time is a lot of times your product will condition those customers over time too. So now their expectations grow. And if their expectations grow, but you don't grow with them, they're going to stop using your product, right, over time or in short order. So that's where you'll start seeing the attrition come in. So in order to retain, have good retention numbers, you need to continuously evolve these value propositions as your customers evolve as well. Your value propositions will inform your cost and revenue considerations, as well as marketing and sales narratives. Everything comes from these. It's like when you're talking about the value proposition and you can start assessing how painful something is, or assessing how valuable a gain is, you can also start to quantify exactly how much that is, how much a customer is willing to spend, right? If their crops are going to be, better coming out the other end, they're able to save more and less waste. That means that means something very much to the bottom line of the supplier, to the next level of retailer, and so on and so forth. So, understanding value proposition will drive you to understanding where your cost and revenue considerations need to be as well. And of course, your marketing and sales narratives. All this value proposition is really the end result of all the early research you're doing with the market, product, customer fit. Okay, so as everything I like to do, I love to use these canvases because it's a great way of having kind of a one pager that looks like exactly everything that we need to kind of focus on. So that idea discovery canvas is a great way of having a lot of information all in one space. Everything kind of around the boundaries of what your business needs to do and why, and how much it will cost and how much you'll make from it, so on and so forth. Same thing goes with this canvas, right? This is about starting to understand your customer. Now, I know this looks a little silly, cartoonish and everything else, and it doesn't necessarily have to make sense as far as that goes as you apply it to some more scientific and medical space and everything else. But if you think about this, and it's really the next canvas that I'm going to assign to you as kind of your homework, I just wanted to show you this. This is a great way of taking your persona, right? And so I have another group I'm working with that just came up with a great one of these, where they have a very specific customer target. She fits a very specific model by both demographic as well as a variety of different geographic and other elements that are part of her persona, her typical customer. Now, she's not a real person, but she is a persona, and they actually have a picture of her, and they gave her a name and everything else, and they put a role in there. And then they started going down this kind of process of saying, okay, what are the negative trends? Not what are the negatives that she's experiencing directly, but what are the trends in the marketplace that will affect her decision-making? Also, conversely, what are the positive trends, right? And so in this space, their product started off with COVID-19 because of COVID-19, right? And so there's a lot of negative trends that were related to that, and a lot of new normals that people are getting used to. But those also, some of those became positive trends, like they're starting to see with their product how their typical prototypical user is actually being influenced by the positive trends more than the negative trends. So these are two influencers of our persona. Then in the headaches and fears and the opportunities and hopes, you can see those are pains and those are gains. What's causing me headaches? What am I afraid of? And what opportunities do I have to gather and gain hope and get to personal goals that I want to get to, and professional goals and so on and things. So what are these motivations? And again, this also goes back to that motivation, ability, trigger, decision matrix, the FOG behavior model we talked about at the beginning of this program or the cohort. Is this is really ultimately what I'm trying to do, is figure out where the person's influenced by, what are the pains and gains that they that I can match up to, and then really what how my product can kind of help. That is what I can start kind of looking towards in the middle of, like, what was the actual need here, right? And so when you're looking at the person, then you can kind of put in here what the needs are, the values and everything that's to the derive. So this is the one that you'll utilize here. It's a little bit, I don't know if it's necessarily straightforward, but certainly less cartoonish, but it is certainly a better tool of just kind of capturing a few of those things, right? The other one is very important to kind of capture the environmental stuff around a prototypical user. This one is really focusing specifically on what your product will do, right? So over to the left, you kind of go from left to right, and here you see that little triangle to the left, products and services. What are the products and services you can offer your customers so they can get their job done? That's where you put in your product, right? Just a brief description about what it is. And then over here on the other side, the little half, cut off triangle from the circle, job to be done. That's what your product will do. What is the job that the customer needs, right? This is what they're going to deliver upon. And then on the top, staying in the circle, understanding from the other canvas or however you did it, what are the gains you're looking for? What would make your customer happy? Then when it pains, what is annoying or troubling your a customer right now? So these are there. Then going back to your left, looking at gains and creations. I know we're kind of jumping around, but it actually does make sense that when we're doing this and looking at the gains and pains, these are the things that are related to my product that actually deliver on those gains or deliver on those pain reliefs, right? So between these two diagrams, the circle and the square, I have been able to identify what my customers' pain points are, what my customers' gain points are, and the job that they're expecting. So I know what their expectation is, and then matching that up to my left of understanding what my product will create for them and what my product will relieve for them, right? And so taking your prototypical first beachhead customer and going through this exercise will allow you to establish what we will consider to be your value proposition. And remember, it's not just one thing. You should have a bullet of list of things right here. If it is one thing, that's okay. Don't get me wrong, but please kind of exhaust the energy to kind of see multiple things that could create gain and multiple things that alleviate pain. And that will allow you to have a more robust narrative, right? Because there's not just one thing. Now, if it is that one thing, like with the epilepsy thing, it is kind of that one thing, right? But you can kind of expand upon it, like, so it could be a very simple thing. Like a gain creator would be a near or actual seizure-free lifestyle, right? And the pain relief would be fears of, relieving the fears of having those and living that lifestyle where you could have an epileptic episode at any moment, right? So for that one, this could be fairly simple where there's only like one or two things, but I do, again, challenge you to think are there any subsequent or tertiary or anything else that might be seemingly minor that could also alleviate pain and create gain, right? Okay, before I move on to regulatory, is there any questions about value proposition? Okay, so we're going to step through this rather quickly. Again, the decks are up on the Google's Drive as well as recorded on YouTube channel. So I think all this information, the two areas that I really want to discuss tonight beyond customer and the solution statement and the value proposition were the two parts that actually are very, very, also very, very important for y'all, which are understanding the regulatory considerations and then also understanding the intellectual property, right? And that's what I wanted to cover here because Dawn does a great job of doing the whole regulatory part. We don't even have to worry about that as far as we're concerned. Hopefully you got a lot out of that and she is there for you if you need more information. What I wanted to go through is just basically building a moat around your business, right? And this is more important in some of your spaces than maybe some of the other businesses that I work with that are not in the healthcare or medical space or even in the ag space, where a lot of times a patent is not even viable, right? There's not even anything to do as a utility patent or a design patent, or in a case like that, a plant patent, right? So patents really aren't really relevant for them. So they have to figure out more ways to kind of protect themselves. Now, one thing I want to say before I jump into these actual tools is, ultimately, your best competitive advantage is execution, right? Coming up with a plan, building a team, building a business, creating the narrative, gathering the funding, going out in the market, delivering on your expectations for your customers, so on and so forth, and doing it better than anyone else with higher customer satisfactions. That is the best way to protect your business. That is the best way to keep gathering profit from what you're doing, is just outperform, right? So that's the most important thing. That's kind of the business operational side of things. These are actual tangible things to protect you and build that moat around your business of protection in a variety of different ways. So what is intellectual property? I shouldn't have to say this to everyone here, and I really don't, but I'm going to read it out, the kind of description right now. Everyone on this group really understands IP, but this is a work or invention that is the result of creativity, such as a technology, manuscript, or a design to which one has rights and for which one may apply for a patent, copyright, trademark, etc. Right? So it's something that you have thought of or your group has thought of that you can wrap some sort of thing around, which is a patent, copyright, trademark, and a few other things that we'll discuss here in a minute. So here's some of those types, right? So when we're thinking along these lines, brands, logos, marks, descriptors, all these taglines, the logos that you have, the various designs of that logo, the various applications of those logos. I mean, we can think of a variety of different companies that have all sorts of variations of their logos. FedEx has one logo that is very similar, but different colors for each one of their under one of their operating units underneath the main umbrella of FDX. So FedEx Ground has a green color, and Freight has this color, and Trade Networks has another color, and so on and so forth. But they have trademarked all of those around their brand, right? So each one of those logos has a very specific use case, a very specific mark, very specific descriptors and taglines, and so on and so forth to describe their area of operation. But the overall brand guideline includes all of them, right? And so brand is very important, and there's a lot of variations of the brand. Certainly technology, hardware and software. If you're just sitting there and you're just thinking about something and it's really, really novel and no one in the world's done it, that is your intellectual property. But not until you bring that into the open and actually start doing anything is it when, you don't need to protect it when it's in your own mind, but when it's out there in space, in the air, you really have to figure out the best ways to protect it. When you're talking about technology, that can be trademarks, but it also can be copywriting. It can be a variety of other things. Certainly trade secrets, our intellectual property, client and price list intellectual property, any inner workings that support your own financials or anything else, those are all intellectual property that if someone else got their hands on it or someone is able to, undersell you with your own product, that's a bad thing, right? That's not just infringement, it's also taking away business from you. So all of these things can be types of intellectual property and more types. All right, so where are the areas of protection? These are a few. We're going to go through each one of these, but I'm going to read them real quickly. Trademarks, copyrights, patents, trade dress, and trade secrets. These are all areas of intellectual property protections. And each one of them does a fairly distinct thing, and it's for a fairly distinct area of protection. So just kind of going through each one of these things. A trademark is a word, slogan, phrase, symbol, or design that helps to identify and distinguish you or your business as the source of your product and or services from products and services provided by someone else. Seems very straightforward because it is, right? It's everything, that brand we talked about, those logos we talked about, the unique phrases or slogans, the descriptors that are below the logo. I mean, things like Uber, the largest cab company that owns no cabs. I mean, these kind of taglines, those can be trademarked in that regard. Identity, title, symbols. And also know that, two people can have the same name and each of them trademarked if they are in distinctly different industries or distinctly different verticals, right? So it's not like if I come up with, my Flow Venture Labs idea that I'm working on, and it's part of this, presentation, it's not like someone else couldn't name something Flow ice cream services or whatever it is, or Flow yogurt. I don't know. That sounds like actually a good name, right? So if they're in the yogurt space and I'm designing products for startups, we're not competitors, right? And we can both have trademarks around our name. Now, if they had a logo and I changed my logo to look just like their logo, now I'm infringing. That happened a lot when Facebook launched Metaverse. That Meta logo came very close to a lot of other logos, and a lot of people jumped on them about that too. Now, did they change anything? No. Did anybody sue them over it? Probably, but I'm not sure where that's gone. My point is like, people can have similar or same things. They can't be the same. I shouldn't say same, similar things, as long as they are in distinctly different areas, right? There can't be another social media product called Facebook, right? It's just not allowed. Okay, actually jumping back to trademarks real quick, just with a very quick example. Microsoft long time ago, 35, 40 years ago, tried to trademark the word Windows, right? Because that was part of their product. And in fact, it was part of their name, but they got denied because the term Windows had already applied in common use in so many different variations. And I'm not just talking about the windows on your walls and everything else. I'm talking about windows inside of a computer environment. So because that word became like what we used to call every tissue brand Kleenex and every copier, a certain name, that was, something that had already made it out there in the mainstream as a term that was utilized and not owned by any one group, and therefore no one could trademark that. So that's an example of sometimes when you actually go for something and get denied, is because it's already utilized in so many spaces. There's no reason to trademark anymore because it's just open to the public at that point. All right, copyrights. This is a form of legal protection that protects original works of authorship. That's an important word, fixed in any tangible medium of expression, now known or later developed, from which they can be perceived, reproduced, or or otherwise communicated either directly or with the aid of a machine or device. Wow, that's a lot, right? So thinking about songs, right? So songs, very copyrightable, very protectable. The problem is like you can't, it's hard to encode songs with that copyright. So you actually have to do this with the Copyright Office for your songs, or the label actually protects intellectual property, and in most cases owns the intellectual property. And there's a lot of kind of ways this gets sliced and diced with whether the artist owns it or the label owns it. And so many times, and this is still very, very prevalent, where the artist doesn't actually own the intellectual property. And you'll see a lot of things, I don't know how many Taylor Swift fans are out there, and I'm not overly one, but that she has actually have a great example of that with who owned the intellectual property and who owned the music rights. She owned the music rights, meaning she could actually reproduce her own music in any way she wanted, but this other person owned the songs that were already produced, right? So he makes money off the songs that are produced, but she can just redo her whole album in her own way, and she did. And she owns that. So they actually own two pieces of the same intellectual property, but in two different manners, and allowing them to do two different things, but also each one of them was protected from the other. And it's a very interesting model. Regardless of what you think of Taylor Swift, go look at her intellectual property and copyright background. It's rather interesting. All right, movies, pictures, software code, all these can be copyrighted. Now, here's a good example also. Copyright is not actually something you have to file, although it is something you can file. But if I were to take a picture of someone and I was using somebody else's camera, and this happened at the Grammys, I think it was, Bradley Cooper grabbed Ellen DeGeneres' camera, took a big old groupie picture with a bunch of different people, and the debate became who owned that picture. Well, Ellen DeGeneres owned the device, but Bradley Cooper is the one who pushed the button. He's the creator. He created the intellectual property that is that picture. Now, no one really cares who owns that picture, but the example is very, very clear and cut. It's like the creator was a person who utilized the device to capture that moment. It doesn't matter who owns the device it was captured on. Now, if you're working for a company and you're using all their equipment and everything they're doing, and you're underneath their employment agreement and everything else, like a lot of people possibly are on this call, then guess what? That entity owns that intellectual property right. You might have a partial ownership. You might even have your name on the patent and no one else, but they're motivated to kind of keep things moving along and try to get that into commercialization. So they have their own rights as well in that regard. All right, patents. A patent is a government issued property right given to an inventor to exclude others from making, selling, or using their invention for a set up period of time, requires public disclosure of your IPs as a condition for their protection. And that's a big thing, right? And in the 90s, it was changed from first to invent to first to file. So even though you might invented something first, if someone else comes up with something similar and they file before you, your patent will not be granted. I mean, that's just the way it works. It's first to file, right? So it's very important to keep your intellectual property pretty tight to the chest and protect it any way you can until that patent comes in. And there can be a very long time frame that it takes to get that patent. It can be up to several years in some cases. Usually, if the US PTO is not too backed up, it can take 18 months. And that's between when it was reviewed and applied for. And then there's also a publication window when everyone can actually review that patent in the general public. And it's also a time when people can come and challenge it. So that's why they do that. And then after that 18-month period is when they really grant you that full patent. There's 3 types. There's a design patent, a new original ornamental design for an article or a manufacturer that's good for 14 years after you've been granted it. At that point, anyone can copy your design directly from that, and there's no patent protection anymore. Utility patents, either a process, machine, article manufacturer, or composition of matter, that's good for 20 years after that. Most all patents fall into this space of utility patents. I shouldn't say most all. What I'm saying is a large majority fall into utility patents. And then plant patents and any distinctive and new variety of plant. So, I mean, when we're exploring the rainforest and someone discovers a new plant, they can actually get a plant patent for that. And that's good for 20 years as well. Okay. All right, here's a few more. These are actually fairly interesting. So trade dress is another one. So the visual appearance, characteristic, and overall look and feel of a product or its container, packaging, or design that uniquely signifies the source of the product to consumers. So this is not the logo of Coca-Cola, right? But it could be Coca-Cola red, right? And there's a color called Tiffany's blue. It's a very specific color blue that no one else can use without infringing on Tiffany's, Breakfast at Tiffany's, famous Tiffany's, blue color and blue box. Both the box and that color are known as Tiffany blue, right? And that's very distinct. Goldfish baked cracker shape. There can't be any other people that do goldfish in the shape of goldfish because they have the trade dress protection on there. John Deere signature green and yellow tractors. Those are very distinct colors that people recognize immediately as being John Deere. And those are protected as trade dress. No one can come up with a tractor that is in the same vein of what they're doing with the same colors of green and yellow. And they can't even change it up and do yellow and green, right? Those are very distinct utilizations of that specific color for that specific product and that specific vertical that no one else can actually compete with. Now, everybody can use green and yellow. You can use green and yellow together, right? But you can't use it in the same fashion and compete with John Deere in that same vertical. Then trade secrets, we talked about this a little bit earlier. These are client lists, price lists. The trade secret is confidential proprietary knowledge that is not generally known or reasonably discernible by others that gives your business a competitive and economic advantage, right? So it's internal workings of your business. These are the various things that you want to protect against your competitors, like specifically your client and price list. These are all things that are confidential and proprietary in nature. And then just the last thing I wanted to discuss is like an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. This is another form of protection that is widely used, especially in the technology space, to ensure that someone that you're talking to early on does not talk and share or steal any of your information. So it's a non-disclosure agreement. It's just an agreement that says, if I work with you and you work with me, that we're going to mutually agree that you can't share my technology with anyone else without my permission. And that's to protect me from, having someone else share something without my control. But at the same time, it can also get in your way. if you're brought on someone who's an advisor or someone who's a industry knowledge expert, a known opinion leader, then you want their knowledge, right? And you want their networks and you want their connections. So an NDA can sometimes get in the way of allowing them to do what they did for you. So a contract is better than an NDA, basically saying, hey, this is what I'd like you to do. This is what I would like you to share. And this is how I'd like to construct that. And that can be in a form of NDA, but generally there's no kind of remedy in an NDA. There's no damages in an NDA. So when they go to a court and someone's saying they infringed on my property and I've lost billions of dollars, there's not a court in the world that's going to say, great, you get $1 billion, right? It's too hard to quantify what the damages are with just an NDA alone, right? So it does provide a level of protection, but it's not the huge kind of ironclad thing that a lot of people think it is, but it does provide a good use when you're early on and trying to talk to people and you want to really protect your idea. But once you get into that patent and once you get into that publication phase, an NDA is meaningless, right? Because now it's out in the public. You can go Google every patent that's out there, right? And so anybody can do that. So an NDA at that point is just meaningless. Okay. So any questions about intellectual property? All right, so we've lost a few people. Hopefully they're going to understand the homework, but for those that are left, this is it. Taking the value proposition canvas, the one with the square and the circle, map out your main value propositions for your solution, right? Work again on your solution statement. If I've given you some feedback and you want to kind of hone that into the next draft, I think that's good. And you need to do that before you get into value proposition, but start taking that value proposition and start, applying what you believe to be the pains and the gains. Now, one thing you might need to do is talk to people about that. You need to validate your ideas. Don't be afraid to go out there and talk to people and do a little bit of customer discovery. But otherwise, given the time that we have, start putting in what your assumptions are around this value propositions so we can start validating those and talking about those next week. So that's your homework. Okay, any questions about what we've discussed tonight? All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody's participation again. I thought that was a really great event that we had as far as the guest speaker goes. A lot of great information coming out of MRC Global and Dawn. She's a great resource. If you need help from us, as always, reach out. The video will be up on YouTube, hopefully later on tonight, but earlier tomorrow morning, if not. All the material is located in the Google Drive. The value proposition canvas is located in the toolkit of the Google Drive. Remember to do your homework by next Wednesday. Put it in your team folders. I'll go look at it and we'll discuss it next Thursday. If that's it, no one has any questions or anything else, we'll conclude tonight. Thank you again. Looking forward to next week and starting to kind of talk about that 60-second elevator pitch and listen to some of those scripts. All right. Bye, everybody.